Recording in progress.
All right. Hello, good evening. Amanda Lima, I'm the town engineer. We're here tonight because we're at the midpoint of our grant through the MVP. And with me tonight, I have Woods Hole Group and Beta to give a presentation on our update for the project.
All right, thanks, Amanda. My name is Brittany Hofnagel. I am the Climate and Sustainability Team Leader for Woods Hole Group. I will be starting off the presentation with a little bit of introductions and background information, and then I'll be handing it off to my colleague Tito from Beta to explain and walk through the results of this project. So first, we're here to discuss the Yarmouth Route 28 Corridor Resiliency Plan. The agenda tonight will again go over an introduction, briefly talk about some of the outreach and data gathering that we've completed, and then Tito will pick up and explain the network analysis and the results, and we'll briefly discuss next steps at the end. I just want to mention that this was a collaborative team effort. As Amanda said, this is a 2-year project through the state's Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Grant Program. It provides funding support for cities and towns and municipalities for climate change resiliency and funding for implementing these priority projects. We also have the town of Yarmouth. Amanda is the PM for this project for the town, working under the purview of the Department of Public Works, but have also incorporated staff from the police and fire departments, natural resources, and the community development. And then the consulting team is, again, my team at Woods Hole Group and Tito's team at Beta. And together we provided the expertise in the climate planning and resiliency framework, and Tito's team provided the network analyst experience and other civil engineering expertise. As many of you know, living across the town of Yarmouth, there's many coastal roads along the coastline that are low-lying and have experienced flooding. So this slide that you're seeing now just represents some of those incidences of king high tides or high tide events, not necessarily just storms, but events that have caused flooding along some of these roads. And the question here is how do emergency responders, fire, police, EMS get through these flooded roads to respond to the residents that live in this area if these roads are flooded? And so not only are we considering flooding in the present day or what we know of today, we're also running this analysis on future flooding conditions using some of the state's data. So the state of Massachusetts has a progressive supporting of resiliency and climate change planning, and they are using the Massachusetts Coast Flood Risk Model as the predominant data set for understanding coastal flooding, sea level rise, and coastal storm surge. So on the slide now is you're seeing the results of projected annual chance of flooding from the MCFRM, and this on the slide now is what you could see as soon as 2030. And we're also, for this project, also considering the annual chance of flooding using the results for the 2050 planning horizon. And so this data set, just to summarize, really provides an indication of the annual chance of flooding, not necessarily how deep or how often or how long flooding will stay, but just provides your annual chance of being flooded during a storm event. So not only when we're considering the present day flooding that we know about and also using the projections of the future, we really can help define and describe the problem that we're facing here in Yarmouth. West and South Yarmouth are 2 areas that are low-lying coastal floodplains. They're very densely populated, include environmental justice communities. This area, as we know, is an important economic driver for the town, as summer tourism and other businesses along the Route 28 corridor is important, but it's extremely vulnerable to sea level rise and coastal storm surge. We also are building upon a previous project through the Cape Cod Commission. They conducted a low-lying roads assessment where they identified a lot of the low-lying roads across the town of Yarmouth. What that assessment didn't necessarily take as a direct consideration is how emergency response routes or egresses are vulnerable. So that's where this project comes into play, is we're really focusing on identifying roads that support critical access to this densely populated neighborhood. And also through DPW, Amanda and her staff have received numerous community complaints and concerns and comments about roads being flooded in neighborhoods, cars being stranded, or the concern about not being able to be accessed for emergency services. So understanding the past flooding events, understanding what the future might look like, and understanding the environment that South and West Yarmouth is, in considering the community's concerns, we really wanted to develop a project or an analysis that would help identify critical roads for emergency response and egress, so that we could develop strategies and resiliency options to protect and keep that connection through our neighborhood. So as part of this project, before we completed the analysis, we did complete a series of outreach efforts. We did have an initial listening session back in February to provide some preliminary information of the purpose of this project. We also launched a survey, which is still open. So if there's anyone that has not responded to this email or the survey and wants to, the survey is still open. There is a QR code on the slide that you could use. We also hosted information at the tabling events at the 2 libraries within the study area, and we also presented an update to the select board. As part of this project, it was really critical for us to meet with fire and police, and also the housing associations or the neighborhoods within the study area. With fire and police, we discussed the current major roads that are used to respond to emergencies. And we also understood from them that if the road has at least 8 inches of flooding, that is a point in which they would make a decision about turning around or not risking their equipment. We also met with the Hyannis Park Civic Association to learn about some of the residents' concerns and hear about some of the current flooding that they are experienced. So this information was vital for the analysis. So just to recap the area of interest, so on the screen you see South and West Yarmouth. Again, we were focused on the Route 28 corridor, so the neighborhoods below or south of Route 28. For the purposes of the analysis that Tito is going to describe, we did include some of the major thoroughways north of Route 28, as they would help inform the analysis on alternate routes to travel on if Route 28 should become flooded. So this analysis really focused on South and West Yarmouth. We also did some data gathering. So we collected roads and parcels and buildings throughout the study area so we could understand how many houses are in this area, how many businesses are in this area. And we split up the study area into those 3 districts, West Yarmouth, South Yarmouth, and then that centralized part of Yarmouth, which I don't think has a technical name, but for the purposes of this study are calling it Central Yarmouth. Also indicated where the locations of stop signs, yield signs, and traffic lights are located, as those will help inform the time it takes to travel along the roadways. So using the data from the Massachusetts Coast Flood Risk Model, We didn't have the time to measure every storm scenario. So based on communication with DPW and Amanda and her team, we wanted to select isolated occurrence levels for storms. And so the levels that we chose, match up with those levels that you saw in those maps that range from that pink to dark blue color. For this assessment, we modeled 3 scenarios. So we were looking at the 2 storm occurrence levels for the 2030 planning horizon. So a storm that has a 20% annual chance of occurring, which kind of represents that more near-term risk of a smaller storm, but one that we might see more frequently as soon as 2030. But we also used the 5% annual chance storm event, which is that more, still a near-term risk, but it's a larger storm and less common. And then we also wanted to look at a more longer-term storm event. So we were looking at the 2050 planning horizon and considering that 20% storm event, which is representing that more longer-term risk of a more common storm, but a greater impact due to the changes in the sea level. So those are the 3 scenarios that we ran our analysis for. And so remember when we talked about, we had those interviews with the fire and police, we understood that they really were considering 8 inches of flooding along a road to be detrimental for traversing a road. So from those 3 storm scenarios, we were able to identify the segments along the road network where during that storm event, we would get approximately at least 8 inches of flooding or more. And so everything in red here on the screen is everywhere across the study area that is likely or projected to flood during that first flood scenario that we talked about, that more common storm as soon as 2030 planning horizon comes. When you consider that larger storm but less common storm in 2030, that storm that has that 5% chance of occurring, you can see how the length of road flooding increases when you start to look at areas that has that orange color. And then if we consider that last scenario, that long term, the planning horizon in 2050, but that more smaller storm, but with a bigger impact because of sea level rise, you can see where, where the extent of flooding along the roads extend even further with that yellow. And so that is kind of the basis of the data. I'm going to hand it over to Tito. He'll introduce himself, and then he'll go through the analysis and the results.
Great, thank you so much, Brittany. I'm Tito Sanchez. I'm the GIS manager at Beta Group Inc., and I've been working closely with Brittany on this project. The basis for the analysis that we ran comes from what's called the traveling salesman problem, where it looks at different options for being able to go from point A to point B or multiple points. And what you'll see here is that we're trying to find the quickest point from point A to point B. Now, in option 1, you'll see that the person decided to go from point A to point D, to point B to point E, and then so on and so forth. And essentially what that led to was them, trying to get the clicker here. There we go. Getting all the way around from point A all the way back to point A, and that's a total of 62 kilometers, whereas in option 2, if you run it through a network data set model, it finds the optimal route to get from point A, circle all the way around through all the other points, and then get back to point A. And you'll notice that there's a difference there where now instead we're looking at 48 kilometers as opposed to 62. So there's a cost savings and a time savings as well. This is all done using a GIS-based database, and we run the database through what's called the network data set, and that gives us the ultimate analysis. So an entire network was created for all the roads that Brittany had mentioned before. It's everything south of 28, and then we also picked some roads just west of Yarmouth that leads to the hospital, and then we also took some roads north of 28 to basically include more available roads for EMS to travel on. One thing to highlight too on this map is that based on information from the engineering department, we went through and we selected 9 different spots south of Route 28 that was basically the focus of our study. And what we initially tried to do was going from these locations to either the fire stations or the hospital itself. And basically, we generated a network that will give us that input later on. We incorporated a variety of different metrics to this. So we look at the speed limit being the first thing. We also look at the traffic signals and how much time it takes to stop at these traffic signals. We considered stop signs and yield signs as well. One thing to note is that we took a look at some of the public roads in this area as well, right? So with that being said, if there is no flooding, we will show scenarios where you can get from point A to point B the quickest without utilizing the public roads. But in the event of an emergency, we're able to incorporate the public roads and have the EMS services utilize those roads to get to these areas of interest a lot faster. So here's the first route scenario. And you'll notice that what we ended up doing was that we took the location all the way furthest to the east. And it's that green dot that you're seeing there. And the objective is to try to get EMS from that point all the way over to the hospital. Now, you'll notice a couple of things in this map. The green line that you're seeing here is the original route, meaning that there is no flooding occurring. So they're able to get from that green point all the way to the hospital in 22 minutes and 59 seconds, roughly. So what we ended up saying was like, all right, well, what ends up happening if we run into the 20, 30, 20% flooding scenario? Well, there is no flooding occurring along that route, so it stays the same. It's the same as the original route. However, when you get to the 20, 35% scenario, there is a pinch point, and it occurs right in here on Route 28. So that causes that particular vehicle to have to deviate from Route 28 north and then take a left to head over to the hospital from there. Same thing occurs in the 20, 50, 20% scenario, where there is a pinch point right here between Main and Route 28. So the vehicle has to deviate all the way to the right, head north, and then head west all the way over to the hospital. Now, this begs the question, why not take one of the roads that are closest to this point to get to the hospital, particularly in this neighborhood here? Well, the network data set, the analysis, or the program that we ran is doing exactly what we asked it to do, is find the quickest route. And that's what it's doing. It's telling us to go east on this road and then head north to get to your destination, which in this particular case happens to be the hospital. And bear with me, here we go. So the next route that we took a look at, we're going from Rachel Road all the way over to the hospital again. Original route, present day, given no flooding, it's going to take us over to the west and then, and then north. Oh, that's strange. It's going to take us west and then north to the hospital. However, on the 20, 30, 20% scenario, what ends up happening is that it gives us a detour because there is a pinch point located in this area here. So it's basically making the EMS services go east and then north, and then they take a left on Route 28 and then south to the hospital. It's the same issue with the 20, 35% and the 20, 50, 20% scenarios. Because if, given the fact that the 20, 30, 20% scenario already floods, that just means that that area is going to be flooded regardless. So that's why there's a deviation there. Looking at route scenario number 3, this one's a little unique in the sense that we took a look at how the network analysis ended up deviating some of the routes, but we integrated something what's called a preferred route, and I'll show you what that means in a minute. So looking at no flooding, the original route, it's going to take about 12 minutes and 35 seconds to get from Seagull Road and South Sea Ave all the way over to the hospital. Now, when you hit the 20, 30, 20% scenario, there are no pinch points along that route, so the route remains the same. The next scenario, you're looking at 20, 35%. That remains the same as well. You'll notice that all the routes are the same so far. But then once you get to the 20, 50, 20% scenario, it starts to deviate. And what ends up happening is that it's telling the EMS to go north and then take a left into this neighborhood here, and then head north again because you run into 2 pinch points along Route 28. Now, what we ended up doing was looking at the network analysis, and like I said, it's doing exactly what we asked it to do. It's telling us that this is the quickest route to get from point A to point B. However, we do know that the preferred route from EMS would be just to head north on, Brittany, what does that say? South Sea Avenue, get to the intersection and then take a left. And then because there's a pinch point here, there's really no other alternative except for going north and then taking a left to head back over to the hospital. All in all, with the preferred route included, you're looking at 19 minutes. We're trying to keep everything sub 20 minutes as best as we can. But unfortunately, there are some scenarios where you do have to deviate drastically and the timing is going to increase. Looking at scenario number 4, present day, this is the route going from South Shore Drive and Witten Road. You're going north and then taking a left through this neighborhood, and then you're heading north to 28, taking a left and heading over to the hospital. The 20, 30, 20% scenario, now we start to see some deviations, right? Because there are pinch points. So we're no longer able to take this route. We're going to have to go west and then shoot north and then take a left on 28 to the destination. Notice, however, that there is no 20, 50, 20% route scenario. Why? It's because we start running into pinch points here, here, and here, and the same goes for the 20, 35% scenario as well. In this particular case, it's impassable. There's really no other alternative. You can't go east in this direction because there's a pinch point there, and then you run into all sorts of pinch points on the western side. So there's really no alternative for them to take a look at. Route scenario number 5, again, unique in the sense that we also include the preferred route here. In this particular case, we're going from Seagull Road and South Sea Avenue over to Block Island Fire Department. So if the fire department were to go from this point back to the fire department, then this is what we run into. We've got the original route present day taking us north and then through this neighborhood over to Route 28, north again, and then to the left to head over to the fire department. We notice that the 20, 30, 20% scenario is the same. There's really no change, and likewise for the 20, 35% scenario as well. However, when you start getting into the 20, 50, 20% scenario, we do see a deviation where it wants us to go north through this neighborhood and then over to the fire department, or the fire station rather. But we know that the EMS is just going to go straight north up to 28 and take a left, so that's why we indicated that this is the preferred route. And again, heading outbound, my apologies, we're going from the fire department to the point. So in this particular case, we're starting off the fire department, heading west, then we head south, head west again, and then that takes us down to Bayview Street and Windmill Lane. And that's the original route, again, with no flooding. But then once you start getting into the flooding scenarios with all three, we start noticing that it's impassable. You just can't get to this area here because there's flooding on these areas here. And that's what these little squares are indicating, essentially. Likewise, for route scenario number 7, we start off at the fire department. No flooding at all. It takes us from the fire department all the way down to Vermont Ave and Shore Road. But because of the fact that all three flooding scenarios create flooding along the way, this just becomes impassable. There's no way for them to get to those areas, unfortunately. Route 8, a little unique again. We're starting off the fire department, making our way down to South Shore Drive. So what ends up happening is that no flooding takes us south directly to that area. But then you'll notice that there's flooding here starting in the 20, 30, 20% scenario. So what ends up happening is that they have to deviate all along this road and then onto 28. Then they head south, and then they're going to have to shoot east to get back to that point. Notice, however, that the 20-35% and the 20-50-20% are both impassable because we see pinch points in these locations here. So there's really no other alternative to get this to this point, unfortunately. Likewise with route scenario number 9, Old Main Street Fire Department heading outbound. We see a similar situation where we have a pinch point here in the 20-30-20%, but then we also run into impassable scenarios with the 20-50-20% and the 20-30-5% as well to get over to Ocean Mist Beach Hotel and that area as well. So it's important to note that we ran this analysis for a variety of different routes. There were routes that were just completely impassable due to the different storm scenarios. These are the routes that you're seeing here on screen. We came up with a total of 18 different routes. These were the 9 that were not passable or completely impassable, even based on the first storm scenario. And then the other 9 that I showed you previously in previous slides, those had some sort of detour or some available area to get from point A to point B. So what we see here is that we have the different study areas and the different flooding scenarios and instances where a road may become impassable or there's some sort of detour being displayed. We'll take the case of Bayview Street and Windmill Lane. When there's absolutely no flooding, it's going to take about 8 minutes and 26 seconds to get from point A to point B. And we're looking at the Block Island Road Fire Department to Bayview Street and Windmill Lane. What ends up happening is that it's completely impassable, unfortunately, by all 3 storm scenarios. Likewise with Vermont Ave and Shore Road going from the hospital to this location, completely impassable. And there's pinch points along the way which prevent any EMS services from getting to those locations. However, we do see that in Siegel Road and South Sea Avenue, going from the fire department to that location. It takes about 10 minutes to get there. We do see that at the 20-30-20% flooding scenario, it's the same as no flooding. Likewise with the 20-35% scenario. But then once we get into the 20-50-20% scenario, it adds an additional 56 seconds because there's a slight detour at that location. I'm not going to go through all these for the sake of time, but just do note that we went through this all the different points and identified by scenario how long it's going to take to get from point A to point B, or whether it's impassable or if there's a detour that's going to be necessary at that location. So what does all this mean? By looking at all this information and the culmination of all the routes and all the detours and all the locations where we found that were impassable, we took a look at where each individual route impacted each roadway segment. And we did a count, and we saw that, okay, for example, at Bayview Street, there were 15 instances where it forced the EMS vehicles to reroute along that street. So we did that for every single study area, and we took a look at all the roads. And what this helps us do is that after a series of meetings with the engineering department, this will help prioritize roadway improvements over the next 10, 15, 20 years, so that the engineering department is well prepared for these different storm surges and storm scenarios that we had discussed. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Brittany.
Thanks, Tito. Just to follow up, all of this information is being recorded tonight, so this video will be available to look over again. But we do have a website that is still in development, but ongoing. So any of the other outreach efforts that we've done, the table and events, the maps we've created, a summary of the network analysts' analysis, all of that information is going to be posted on this website. So over the next year, you can use this as a resource for understanding how this project is evolving. So it's up here on the board. It's just a hyperlink right now. So I can get it to you afterwards since you're here in the person, but online you can type this in as a URL. And then we can also find a way for Amanda to maybe send it out via email or post it online.
All these maps would be on that. They're not available now.
They're not available now, but they will be. So I just wanted to cover some of our next steps. So this is ending year one of this project. You know, the work will continue and we'll tighten it up and continue to work on this project, but we are gonna move into year two. So we're gonna kick that off shortly. Currently what's happening is Amanda and her interns are going out in the field and using a field app to survey some of the houses that are in these neighborhoods, that we can understand, you know, if are they located on stilts, are they on fill, just so we can understand when we move forward in this project, we can understand what their exposure to some of this same data that we did the road network on. So they're currently out surveying the field right now, and this will all be data to use on these neighborhood-specific vulnerability assessments. So we'll be able to use the MCFRM, the Massachusetts Coast Flood Risk Model, and not just assess the roads like we did this year, but also assess residence houses and business buildings. And it's really just an exposure assessment. It's not going to be tied to FEMA or insurance or anything like that. It's really just information gathering so that the residents and the businesses in this community can be more informed of their specific risks. We also are targeting to engage with the business community through the Chamber of Commerce. And a big effort of year two is developing regional strategies. So over the course of the next couple months in this year, we could talk about specific adaptation strategies for these roads, but also think of more landscape or regional strategies to help maybe prevent flooding of these roads. So if there's roads like Widmill Lane that maybe elevating them is not feasible, there could potentially looking at beach dune nourishment to help buffer this area of roadways, to help as be more of a proactive way of protecting the roadway. The question was who would pay for beach dune nourishment projects to buffer roads? Yes. So there is grant fundings through the Coastal Zone Management and potentially the MVP program that could support some of that work. There could be a town match required, but there are resources through some state funding opportunities to support some of those more nature-based approaches. Okay.
Off of Malfa Road, and it's quite the project.
Yeah.
And the town really, even though I'm right next to the townway to water, they don't help in any way.
Okay.
So I just was curious, is that on the people who own the land or adjacent to the land or what? And so it's a costly, very costly procedure.
Yes. I think the conversation of whether or not it's public, like a public beach versus someone's private homeowner beach would be the difference of where the funding source would come from. So the states are going to more likely fund those nature-based approaches that are more on a town or public asset versus.
The problem what I have is the townway to water is right next to me, and because they don't do anything, the town doesn't.
Just for the folks that are on Zoom.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Just because I'm right next to the townway to water, because the town doesn't do anything to help that. It's a constant battle with what I have to rebuild and redo all the time.
Okay. So for me, I would have to look at your area in particularly. I'm not familiar with your particular area. But yeah, we could certainly have a conversation and see what the options are with Amanda or the town and who might have the purview of that for sure. So the continuation of this work through year two is hoping next spring to kind of wrap this 2-year grant program with a very public, engaged resiliency fair. We don't have any of the plans set yet. Our hope is that we'll spend the next year kind of planning this resiliency fair, but We are looking at hosting the fair at the Parker's River Landing, which is a project that was worked on by Beta and the town. And it might be an opportunity for residents of this area to see a site that's been adapted for and considering sea level rise. And so it might be a great location to have this resiliency fair. So at this fair, I would suggest that, or I would guess that we would provide information from this project, provide other sources from FEMA, Cape Cod Commission, and other agencies that would be critical for having residents and businesses be better prepared during emergencies and storm events. So it would be an opportunity to share that information. Potential for other vendors to come, things like that, and maybe activities identified for children to make this a family-friendly event. But the goal of this is to be able to provide information to the residents and business owners that live and work in this area. And so with that, I will leave, just want to acknowledge the work from Amanda, who's been spearheading this project from the town, and then the collaboration between Woods Hole Group and Beta to get to us to this point. So if there's any questions, more questions in person, or if there's any questions online, I'm open to some feedback and any questions anyone might have. It looks like we do have one online. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask it out loud?
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm concerned with the network analysis where it shows the timing of people getting transported to the hospital from the different neighborhoods. It seems like 20 plus minutes is a long time. And if there's some sort of flooding or major event, I would assume that there would also be a lot of people evacuating from those neighborhoods. How do those statistics match up with the statistics of reasonable time to get from the fire department to a resident's house and then to a hospital so that they could be treated? I mean, 20 minutes, if you're having a heart attack, is a very long time, for instance.
Yes, hi. Thank you for your comment and concern. And so we did meet with fire. The network analysis is going to obey speed limit laws. The fire department did mention, and along with police, in regards to responding to somebody as well as going to the hospital, whether, once they do arrive on scene, their goal is to secure and stabilize somebody and then go to the hospital. And when that happens, this network analysis is obeying street laws, whether it's traffic lights and whether they're activating opticons in order to make the traffic light turn green, and or proceeding at their comfortable rate of speed to get there, and it may not necessarily match the speed limit. So this isn't so much to focus on the duration, it's more the delta between the different scenarios. So, if a detour is adding on 6 minutes, that's where we're, really focusing in on, or as it's yielded that if they're impassable, and now it's taking those, how often is a certain route becoming impassable, and how do we start prioritizing the roadways in order to, provide improvements to make them, passable.
Yeah, I guess I understand that, but I guess I would be concerned if I were the fire chief or the EMS chief, and I had to report that people hadn't, lives were lost because the standards that they try to adhere to aren't being met because of these events, or just in general. I mean, 20 minutes sounds like a long time, even in a detour situation, for somebody to get from, point A to point B.
Correct, and
So-
these aren't being used for routing for emergency services. This is for a tool for, you know, the Department of Public Works and the community to make investments in roadways or other alternative projects in order to reduce the, you know, chance of needing a detour. So it isn't in response, and, you know, both police made it very clear that they would, you know, whether it's exiting their vehicle and, you know, treading water, or, you know, the fire department talked about exploring grants in regards to getting more high-level vehicles on the roads. You know, this, you know, that doesn't, this is not related to their efforts. This is, you know, mostly focused on, you know, emergency egress and trying to, you know, get people out of neighborhoods, and, you know, is there an opportunity to make an investment in a roadway? So they are a little separate in that, and the focus for this one really is trying, because we do get complaints regarding flooding, and how do we, you know, start prioritizing these, and one of the focus, you know, criteria could be, you know, emergency service to and, you know, from a location.
All right, okay, thank you.
All right.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Just grab the microphone.
I see we're
Hold on one second.
2050 here.
And if you could just say your name, and I know you mentioned
Okay.
that earlier.
Okay, my name is Cindy Van Doren. I live on Malfa Road, which it's really the devastation of the rising water is pretty significant there. But it's not far from the hospital, and I'm thinking in 2050, is the hospital going to be fairly flooded? They built that new building right by the harbor, which I was like, what are they thinking? Because the water is rising so much. So what happens if, you know, the hospital by 2050, that's quite a few years away. It could be flooded for that matter. It's, you know, close to where I live. You know, the cranberry bog is on the other side, but, you know, then there's a whole nother package of problems, which just something to be aware of. I'm not sure what the flooding situation for the hospital will be eventually.
Right. I mean, I think, Amanda, correct me if I'm wrong, but the hospital is definitely on the Barnstable side, right? So that the hospital itself was not, while it was a destination for the network analyst, it wasn't necessarily in the consideration of what the risks of the hospital are. So that would be under the purview of Barnstable County, but I guess in the instance that the hospital is the main source for the entire county and not just, you know, Barnstable.
The figure that's here, the 2030 doesn't show flooding inundation, and then the 2050, it's a, you know, a higher level event. But yeah, yeah.
I would say that the graphics here really are used for information sharing. In terms of strategies, there's always options for homeowners to take on, and whether elevating their houses on stilts or elevating critical infrastructure like electricity and things like that above onto like the second floor, things like that. And then there's also options for other ways for more municipal-owned buildings or commercial buildings that they can also take on. I know other hospitals in other low-lying areas. One example that I have is in Florida, where they have these flood barriers that they install in the advance of a storm. And so those are type of strategies that we'll likely discuss in year 2, but are things that you could search online and would be a case for protecting some of these more vital, critical buildings from flooding. Any other questions?
Any more questions on Zoom? If you'd like to raise your hand. All right. Seeing none, thank you for taking the time out to learn more about our project. We're really excited for the Resiliency Fair, and we'll announce that date well in advance for planning, and hopefully we get good participation.
I would love to have some copies of, you know, eventually if you can get the website of this. Is very, all this is really interesting.
Absolutely.
All right.
All right.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Recording stopped.